Hey guys, this is Clinton Jeff and this is my review of the Motorola One Action. Alright, so if you're here and you're watching this video, you're probably here for one of two reasons. Number one, you're a huge Motorola fan, or maybe you're just really fond of the brand and this phone meets your budget, so you're curious about it. Or number two, you're actually looking for an action camera in a phone and the Motorola One Action is literally your only choice. I mean, there's nothing else out there that actually does what this phone does, technically speaking. Also, there's reason number three, you're a loyal subscriber and you watch all of my videos. Thank you, I appreciate you, I really do. But yes, here we are with the Motorola One Action. Motorola has had a lot of ones lately. There's a regular Motorola One, there's the Motorola One Power, there's the Motorola One Vision, and apparently there's even a Motorola One Zoom in the works. But today we're here to talk about the latest entry in Motorola's One series, and that is the Motorola One Action. As you can tell from the name, the unique deal here is that this phone has an ultra-wide angle camera. But not just any ultra-wide angle camera on any other phone. Oh no! This one is installed at a 90-degree angle so that you can record landscape videos in portrait. Yep, I know, it's crazy. You can hold the phone in portrait mode and record landscape videos. So you can kind of see who Motorola is targeting with this phone. I mean, it's very clear that this phone is really meant for one particular type of buyer, but there's still a lot else to like about the Motorola One Action. Just like the Motorola One Vision, which it shares a lot in common with, there's a 6.3-inch LCD, there's a 3600 mAh battery, and curiously enough, there's also a Samsung Exynos processor powering everything inside. That's definitely a major win for Samsung. But there's also a couple of differences compared to the Motorola One Vision as well, mostly in the camera department. The main camera is a 12 megapixel unit versus the 48 megapixel quad Bayer one on the One Vision. There's also a 12 megapixel front-facing camera on the One Action versus the 25 megapixel one on the One Vision. But the front-facing camera here can record 4K video, which is kind of cool. Alright, so from those specs, you can see that Motorola is really meaning for this to be a kind of action camera replacement. Because you can take great ultra-wide angle shots from the back camera, and you can take crisp 4K video with the front-facing camera as well. Maybe this is meant for YouTubers actually. Alright, before we go on about the camera, let's start as usual with design. The Motorola One Action measures 161 by 71 by 9.2 millimeters and weighs in at about 176 grams. It comes in a denim blue color and a pearl white color as well. It's actually quite comfortable to hold because it's a very tall phone. I mean, you won't be able to reach the corners of that screen, but it is light enough to use otherwise. The build quality is majorly plastic, as I assume Motorola wanted to focus more on durability over premiumness here, since this phone is meant to be in action camera-like scenarios. There's a plastic frame coupled with a plastic back, but all in all, the phone feels pretty solid and also looks kind of good as well. I mean, it's not as flashy as some of the phones out there, but you have to admit it does look very Motorola. You'll notice a crosshatch pattern on the back panel towards the sloping edges that adds a little bit of drama to the design, with a finer mesh design in the flat portion. Of course, the main attraction here is a triple camera at the back. This is actually Motorola's first triple camera phone, which is crazy nowadays because everyone's making quad camera phones. And as such, Motorola very proudly shows off the specs right under the camera module. I mean, if you got it, you might as well flaunt it, right? There's also a dual LED flash right below. Below that, you'll find the fingerprint sensor, which also doubles up as the Motorola branding. You gotta love that. The sensor is placed in a really good spot where your finger naturally falls when holding the phone, and it works quickly enough. On the right side, you'll find the power button and volume controls. On the left side, you'll find the dual SIM card slot. I should mention it is a 3-choose-2 slot, so you can either have 2 SIM cards or 1 SIM card and 1 micro SD card. At the bottom, you'll find that USB Type-C port. Yes! You'll also find the loudspeaker grill as well. You'll also notice a tiny little pinhole for the microphone. The single loudspeaker is actually quite loud and pretty good in terms of quality. Definitely loud enough for videos or for gaming, but just make sure you don't block the loudspeaker with your fingers when you're holding the phone. Coming to the top, there's a much appreciated headphone jack and of course a pinhole for the secondary microphone as well. The great loudspeaker quality actually made me very curious about the headphone jack quality as well. And guess what? Audio quality out of the headphone jack is actually pretty good as well. Way to go, Motorola. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about the front of the phone. And when you talk about the front of the phone, you're gonna have a conversation about that giant selfie camera cutout. I mean, you guys know I'm a huge fan of the punch hole type notch solution, but yikes. Usually with smaller notches and other types of cutouts, they're easy enough to get used to. But in the 1 week that I used the Motorola One Action, it's actually a little hard to get used to that giant cutout. I mean, it's not really a deal breaker, and maybe I'm being a little hard on Motorola here, but it is big. And this has also forced Motorola's software team to stretch the status bar all the way down to make sure it envelopes the cutout, which in turn makes it way more apparent. Eesh. Well, at least it's not a notch, right? Apart from that, bezels around are kind of kept to a minimum. They are not the slimmest, but it's not too bad. But that's usual with mid-range phones nowadays. Coming to the rest of the display though, it's actually one of the few phones out there that has a 21:9 aspect ratio, which means no letterboxing on most videos when you're watching them. I mean, the cutout does get in the way of course, but all in all, the display quality is pretty decent. It appears to be the same display as the Motorola One Vision. It's a 6.3-inch IPS LCD at a very tall 21:9 aspect ratio at 2520 by 1080 pixel resolution, which works out to about 432 ppi, which is pretty dense. Color reproduction is a usual Android deal with natural, boosted or saturated modes available in the display settings. There's a slight bluish tint in the default profile, but overall it's not too bad. Overall display quality is pretty decent and brightness goes all the way to over 450 nits. That brightness helps out outdoors as well, where Motorola assumes you'll be using this phone a lot because action camera. Alright, let's move on to hardware. Here's where things get interesting. The Motorola One Action has a Samsung Exynos 9609 chipset, just like the Motorola One Vision. It's also kind of the same processor that's on the Samsung A50, but with its CPU slightly underclocked. It's an octa-core processor with 4 Cortex A73 high-performing cores and 4 Cortex A53s. And there's also a Mali GPU. As such, benchmarks are pretty much what you'd expect. Scores are pretty much identical to the Motorola One Vision and close to the Galaxy A50. At the same time, it's more powerful than Huawei's Kirin 710, which is used on the P30 Lite. Overall performance is pretty decent on the Motorola One Action. And since I know I'm going to be asked this question, yes, you can run PUBG on it just fine. On medium settings though. Of course, that being said, there are more powerful processors out there for the same price range. There's the Snapdragon 710 on the Realme 3 Pro, but this processor is more powerful than the regular Realme 3 or even the Mi A3, which is another Android One smartphone. Alright, speaking of Android One, it's time to talk about software. The One Action is part of the Android One family, so as you can guess, it runs a really clean version of Android 9 Pie. I mean, Pixel devices are already on Android 10 right now, but I'm sure Android 10 isn't too far off for Android One devices as well. That being said, there are a couple Motorola touches as well, especially in regards with navigation. Motorola calls it One Button Nav, and is basically a single long button at the bottom of the screen. You tap it once and it will take you to the home screen, swipe up and you'll go to the multitasking menu, swipe the button towards the left and it acts like a back button, swipe it to the right and it will switch to the last opened app on your phone. Alright, so navigation is kind of a touchy topic on Android right now. So you'll either love this or hate this, but if it annoys you, you can switch off One Button Nav and you can go back to the traditional Android navigation as well. But that's just the tip of the iceberg here. There's a couple more gestures as well. For example, a twist of the phone will launch the camera app even if the screen is off. And if you hold the phone and do a karate chop gesture, you will switch the flashlight on or off. These gestures are cool to have. I mean, I didn't use them personally, but if you like it, here you go. There are some things I absolutely love about Motorola though, like the Moto display, which is their not always on display that shows notifications and lets you interact with them right on the lock screen. It'll also wake up when you pick up your One Action. There's also attentive display, which keeps the screen switched on as long as you're looking at it. Apart from all of this, it's basically your usual stock Android, just like Google intended it to be. Of course, the exception here is the extended status bar for the camera cutout, which does take away some screen real estate. Nothing much else to say. You guys know stock Android 9 by now. If you're a fan of stock Android, you're gonna love this phone. If you're a fan of some other UI, maybe not so much, but aren't we all supposed to like stock Android anyway? Alright, so now let's move on to the most interesting part about this phone, the camera. Or should I say the action camera. As I mentioned earlier, the One Action has 3 cameras at the back. The first is a 12 megapixel primary camera at f1.8 aperture, 1.25 micron pixels and a 26mm equivalent lens. Below that, there's a 5 megapixel depth sensor, which is your usual Android arrangement nowadays. But let's talk about that action camera. Instead of having just a normal boring old ultra wide angle camera like on any other phone, the wide angle camera sensor on the One Action is rotated 90 degrees. Why? Because most people use their phones in portrait. And now you can record landscape orientation video while holding your phone in portrait. I mean, this is funny because I didn't really think about it much until this phone was announced. The ultra wide angle camera has a 117 degree field of view, which translates to about a 13 mm equivalent focal length. Since some of you all might be wondering, in comparison, the field of view of the GoPro Hero 7 while shooting in 16:9 is about 134 degrees at its widest setting, and that drops down to about 96 degrees with EIS enabled. For the action camera, Motorola is using a 16 megapixel sensor here with a 1 micron pixel camera pitch. But weirdly enough, you can't take photos with the ultra wide angle camera. Yeah, you heard me right. I know it's weird. I mean, you can take 3 megapixel shots while you're recording a video, but this is just a weird limitation. It's so weird that I'm actually genuinely curious as to why. I mean, why would you only want to take videos with this? The hardware is right there. I mean, maybe hopefully they'll allow this in a software update later on. The camera app on the One Action is also another Motorola tweak on top of stock Android. There's a swipe navigation to switch between the still camera, video, and different modes, or you can just tap on the icons as well. There's access to quick settings like HDR modes, self-timer, flash, and active photos. There's also the manual mode, which will be very appreciated by some of y'all. You can control ISO, white balance, shutter speed, exposure compensation, and manual focus as well. Coming to camera quality, daytime photos on the One Action look pretty okay for the price range with a decent amount of detail. Colors look a little muted, but dynamic range is surprisingly good. Portrait mode works pretty well with decent subject isolation. You can adjust the strength of the bokeh blur effect, and there's various effects that you can throw in as well. The low light camera shots weren't as impressive though, producing washed out photos with a lot of softness and noise creeping in. There's no night mode either, which is kind of a bummer. So just like an actual action camera, you probably don't want to use this too much in low light situations. Coming to the selfie camera, there's a 12 megapixel f2.0 aperture fixed focus camera with a 26 mm equivalent focal length. It also records 4K video, which is pretty neat. The selfie camera quality on the One Action was actually pretty good with solid detail. It also did a really good job with skin tones. As you'd expect, you can also take portrait selfies, but the results are as you'd expect from a mid-range phone with a single front-facing camera. It's kind of a hit or miss. Coming to video recording, this is actually the most important section for the One Action, since they're trying to replace an action camera here. Since it can't take photos, the 90-degree mounted ultra-wide angle camera on this phone is literally meant for video. Now here's where things get a little bit weird. The action camera can record up to 1080p resolution video at both 30 fps and 60 fps. But you can only record 4K video on the normal camera. You can't record 4K video out of the action camera even though there's a 60 megapixel camera sensor. Again, a little weird, but okay. Thankfully though, for all 1080p videos, there is full electronic image stabilization. And it actually works pretty well. I put it in comparison with my GoPro Hero 7 Black, which I'll make a separate video on later on. And the results were actually reasonably good. If you aren't shaking around too much, like on a walk or a gentle run, you'll get pretty smooth footage out of the One Action. There's a slight jello effect towards the corners though, which might be because of the software stabilization, but overall it's not too bad. Overall, video quality is not too detailed, but is decent enough as far as ultra wide angle cameras go. The sharpness seems to drop further when you switch over to 60 fps, but overall color saturation and dynamic range is pretty solid. So overall, pretty good. Will this replace your action camera though? That's gonna be very subjective. It really depends on what you want out of an action camera. But going on just quality, the One Action actually does a pretty good job. Alright, let's move on to the last section, battery life. The Motorola One Action is powered by the same 3500 mAh battery that was used on the Motorola One Vision. And since it has the same display and the same chipset, you can pretty much expect exactly the same battery life. Battery life is decent enough but not too great. You'll get about 10 hours of screen on time out of this phone. So it will last you through the end of a workday with some battery percentage left. But if you want to go around using this like an action camera, you might want to carry a power bank along. There's also a 10-watt charger included, which takes about 2.5 hours to charge from 0 to 100%. Alright guys, it's time for the CJ verdict, and here we go. The Motorola One Action is actually a really interesting phone. I like that Motorola knows exactly who they're targeting, but it's definitely facing a tough crowd. Around the same price range, you have phones like the Samsung Galaxy A50, which comes with better battery life and a better display. But granted, the One Action has a better camera and better video quality, and also it's about stock Android versus One UI. There's also the Realme 3 Pro, which has a more powerful GPU and better battery life and better camera quality as well. But it doesn't have an ultra wide angle camera. That's where the One Action wins out. So who's the Motorola One Action really meant for? Honestly, if you're a Motorola fan and you're looking for a phone in this price range, the One Action is actually a pretty solid phone. I mean, there is some weirdness though, like that huge camera cutout in the front and the inability to use the wide angle camera for photos. But overall, selfie camera quality is good, rear camera quality is reasonably good, and that Exynos processor is powerful enough that you won't feel like you're using a slow phone at any point. Plus, it's also an Android One phone, so you know software updates won't be too long of a wait, especially compared to other Android smartphones out there. But that being said, if you're not a Motorola fan and you're just looking for a phone in this price range, there are other phones out there that you might want to research. All I'm saying is if you're buying the Motorola One Action, you're probably buying it for that action camera. And if you are, chances are you're going to be pretty happy with it. Alright guys, so that's what I think about the Motorola One Action. As always, if you guys have any questions about this phone, please let me know right in the comment section below. Or you can just directly reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter at ClintonJeff. And of course, if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button right below and maybe subscribe because that would be appreciated. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Also, for those of you who are probably going to ask, I have a separate video of this versus the GoPro Hero 7. Hopefully I'll have it uploaded very soon and you can check it out.